Hello, my name is Colin Tate. I'm the CEO and the founder of Conexus Financial. Welcome to Redefining Leadership, and thanks to our partners at MLC Wealth. My guest today is Dr Vivienne Ming, an academic, entrepreneur, and technologist who specialises in applying artificial intelligence to some of life's perennial challenges. Vivienne Ming co-founded SOCO Labs, an institute dedicated to redefining the future of human potential. This sits alongside a portfolio of companies that Vivienne has founded to harness machine learning to improve health and human resource services. She is a thought leader in education innovation, a professor and lecturer at Singularity University, and an author and a very much sought after keynote speaker. She supports a number of Silicon Valley startups with accessing capital and solving crucial world problems. Vivienne has won awards from the Financial Times, Berkeley Chamber of Commerce, the Interlaw Diversity Forum, and was voted by Inc. magazine as one of 10 women to watch in tech. In my 30 years of publishing and hosting conferences, I would place Vivienne in my top 5 most fascinating speakers. Knowing her story and her principles and work will be an inspiration to all of us. Please welcome Vivienne. Hello.
Hello, it's so wonderful to be here with you. Would be much better if I were literally there with you. All of California is on fire now, and I hear you guys are at least at ember stage, but this will have to substitute.
Thank you. Well, thanks for making the time and joining us today from Silicon Valley. We've got so many great questions for you, and I do invite our audience to sign on with Slido and bring in your questions as well. We will dedicate the 20 minutes in the middle of this hour to questions for Vivienne. Let's start with education and human potential, Vivienne. You're a world expert on reframing education and the building of skills such as emotional intelligence within formal schooling. What leadership is required to make schools around the world centres of personalised acceptance and enrichment that they ought to be?
I think we have to look at schools as what they are. It's easy as someone that's founded a couple of companies in educational technology to say schools are broken and I'm here to fix them. But the simple truth is schools are what have given us the modern world. They are an amazing tool of civilization, but they haven't kept up with civilization. Now we're looking at an age where, frankly, some jerk like me can build an AI that can do some truly astonishing human-like behaviors. And our reaction to that might be, well, we need to train people even harder. We need better skills. We need more university time. But the truth is, it doesn't matter how much traditional education you have, years and years as a doctor, as a financial analyst, as a coder, if you are doing routine work, no matter how sophisticated, I can build an AI to do it cheaper, faster, and better than you can. And that may sound like a bold statement, but it's actually the trivial endpoint of all the work we've been doing in machine learning over the last 20 years. And I actually look at that as a wonderful statement. It's not one of redundancy or of humanity being left behind, but it's a statement that we don't need that kind of routine work anymore. What we need are people that are creative. We need people that can explore the unknown. And that may sound like fairly soft statements, but trust me, we could spend hours here going through what I really mean by that. But what is really an answer to your question is, well, then that means we need an educational system in the US, in the UK, in Australia, around the world that trains kids how to grow up and explore the unknown. The way we like to think of it is we need to teach people how to learn how to learn. Yeah. Because whatever routine skills we might teach them, by the time they enter the job market, they will already be obsolete. They need to be prepared to create their own skill set on demand as needed. And that would be a truly monumental transformation of our existing, very highly structured, highly archaic education system.
Now, you had an interesting childhood, and you had a bit of an issue with certain authority figures, which it's kind of remained a part of your DNA, it seems to me. So tell me about that. The way you view authority and authority figures, and in particular, you've had some poor leaders in your life too that you've learnt plenty from.
Well, I'm a bit of a weirdo. One of the things that people always ask me during interviews is, who is the one hero that inspired you the most? Who would you want to have dinner with? Like these classic questions. I don't have an answer for that. Clearly my father was my biggest inspiration. This kid, he grew up as a sharecropper. His family, my grandfather didn't even own the land that they were farming in nowhere, Kansas. And yet he was the smartest kid in the entire state of Kansas, which may not seem amazing, but there are probably more people back then in the 30s than there are today. And he was just he was a genius. And he got accepted to every university around the world, and he didn't go. And he didn't go because my grandparents said, what's the point? You're just going to end up back on the farm. And so, he went to the University of Kansas. He became a doctor in the end. I went and fought in Vietnam, not his own choosing, but it certainly changed the trajectory of his life. And then I, in the next generation, grew up in California to this doctor. It is within an American story, within a white American story, it is as far a change as you can imagine. And I think he saw in me everything he didn't have the opportunity to be. I was supposed to win a Nobel Prize when I was young. I was supposed to be amazing. And yet the more I tried to be that person, the more everything fell apart. I would fail classes. I'd sleep through classes. I understood that everyone thought I was smart, but boy, I surely didn't feel that way. And when purely by standardized test scores, I finally got myself into university, I almost immediately flunked out and ended up homeless. So I guess, obviously, there's the second half of that story, how I got to where I am today. But one thing that I have that I think a lot of people in my position don't is the experience of wondering where your next meal is coming from and knowing that it was your fault, that no one else is to blame for my own failure but me. And yet still, particularly in my work in education, being sympathetic to that kid, knowing how terrible I felt that I couldn't live up to anyone's expectations. So, it was a big transformation to go from that and feeling I'd let my father down to, there's some interesting twists in the story, but 10 years later to go back to university. I did my entire undergraduate degree in a single year, got perfect grades in every class, went on and did my PhDs in theoretical neuroscience and psychology at Carnegie Mellon. Like, it is a truly transformative story. And along the way, the one thing I can point back to is until, unfortunately, I was nearly 30 years old, I just couldn't use anything that my father role modeled for me. But it was there in me. And even though I'd failed at all of it, you could think, again, what we were talking about earlier, does every kid need to know how to factorize a polynomial? Do we need to remember all of the dates of famous treaties in history? I don't have a problem with kids knowing any of that. In fact, I'm virtually an applied mathematician. Everyone should know how to factorize a polynomial. But that's not what got me back into my life. What got me back into my life was what my father told me, that you need to live a life of substance, a life that has purpose in it. And when I was finally ready, it is that, not my ability to program or do math or write an essay, that made that exceptional difference. And you have to think about how many kids around the world could get to do the sorts of things I get to do every day, invent the first AI to treat diabetes, the first to treat bipolar disorder. I've just founded my 6th company and I sit on the board of 6 others. I've had an impact on the world, if I may be so bold, and none of it should have happened. It all should have ended years and years ago. But when you have these opportunities, you see that everybody could do it. If we could share that kind of sense that there's something bigger than you in the world.
Is that why you've quoted me that you believe that anyone can achieve anything? You just need to avoid limiting beliefs and subjective utility?
I imagine many people listening have at least some background in economics, and you've heard of utility modeling and theory. In fact, in machine learning, we have our own field of reinforcement learning, which is all about computing utilities and selecting policies based on utilities. But I study people. I study from brains and neurons all the way up to trying to understand culture. I use hard numbers. I use artificial intelligence to do it, but I study people. And when you study people, you find there isn't one equation that computes utility. There isn't one right answer to a set of policies. So when we research, why does someone like my father turn down a chance to go to MIT? Why does a young woman who's worked hard her whole life choose to leave her company instead of continuing to struggle through and reach the top? Often what we see is something called belief-based utility or subjective utility, that it's our personal experiences that influence not just that you know something is possible, but that you believe it's possible, that you believe your hard work will actually make a difference in your life. And I think it's fairly easy, even if you've never lived a life where people denied you opportunity, it's pretty easy to see that you might be fairly skeptical. If your company has no women as a senior executive role, it doesn't seem unreasonable for a young woman working for you to think, why am I working so hard? It's never going to amount to anything. Or a young Black kid in America to look around him and say, God, no one like me. I don't see anyone on Wall Street. I don't see anyone in academia. I'm smart, but it's never going to pay off to take that traditional route. So yes, and the wonderful thing, of course, is being able to build models and actually look and see what are the experiences that will change those choices, that will allow people to make the choice that we wish from the outside that they had made.
Is your dad still with us?
He passed away a few years ago. He was kind of this amazing person, larger than life, this kid out of nowhere in Kansas that traveled the world and skied glaciers, that was so immediate the moment you met him that he was probably the smartest person you'd ever met. And yet, in the end, he just thought of himself as a small town doctor, to be honest, in disappointing terms, that feeling like he could have been so much more. And I guess all I can say is he was there to give my brother and my sister and I, that role model to say there is something more that can be achieved. He went from oil lamps and outhouses in what amounts to the outback of America into this amazing life as a guy who taught rounds at Stanford University. You could wish to have a life that had as much impact on people. And when you realize that you can, then you're willing to sacrifice anything to make that happen.
So noting that about the only thing you've just mentioned throughout this part so far that isn't yet on your CV is in fact a Nobel Prize, a Nobel laureate. Was your dad proud of you on the day he died?
There were rocky moments, needless to say. And I'm sympathetic. You never wish your kid to go through what I went through. Who would ever expect, much less hope, that their child would end up homeless? But the thing is, my mother and my father were always there for me. I mean, that's something I had that many kids that went through what I went through didn't have. And, in the end, he saw a professor at one of the greatest schools in the world. He saw someone that was founding her own companies in the early parts of my my career. I just appeared on the cover of the Sunday business section of the New York Times. And, it was everything he could have hoped for. But, there were some bumps and twists along the way. And he needed to accept that he didn't get to decide everything about my life. But the things that he made important in me, I lived up to for him.
Good for you. How did you end up homeless, given you had the support still of your parents?
Well, because I was so ashamed of it all. When I finally flunked out of university, which largely just amounted to me no longer being able to drag myself out of bed or care about anything, I just crawled into my car and drove away. I'm clever enough that no one really knew. For years and years, no one really knew. I could keep the ruse going for so long. And then by 1995, I very literally had a calendar and I was crossing off the days until the end. And by the end, I mean the end. It's America. You can get a gun. It's not that hard. And so I was just waiting until it all came out, and I wanted to end all of the pain. And, it was in that moment, probably one of the greatest mysteries of my life about myself is why I didn't pull the trigger. But in not, I needed a reason. I needed a reason to be alive because I was not enough of one. So I dug deep and I came up with what sounds like this just absurd idea in retrospect, but it was as simple, as clear as I could make it to myself, which is live a life that makes other people's lives better.
So we'll come back to the source of that darkness a little bit later. I want to give the audience a little bit more opportunity to understand some more about your work and some of what does make you so amazing today. Let me firstly reflect. 15 years ago, you had some genius ideas in the AI space, in the machine learning space, where you're no doubt one of the world's leaders. And you were offered funding, but only if you weren't the CEO, because you were a woman. And you were quoted that we need a CEO in Silicon Valley of any startup. It needs to be a man who has a beard. Is that still the case today? Have we made any progress?
So, this has changed. I'm not going to pretend that the world doesn't move from where it starts. But, I will say that it wasn't like I was raising money in 1975. I was trying to raise money for my first startup in 2009. And people were crystal clear. We love all of your technology. Someone else has to be the CEO. We're not going to fund you. And that was astonishing. It was astonishing that all of the changes I've made in my life meant nothing to them. All they could see was long blonde hair. And it was shocking at times. I've now launched 6 companies. I've raised a fair amount of money. And even if you count all the times I pitched a venture firm that didn't fund me, I have never pitched a female partner. There was never someone in the room with voting power that was like me. And that was truly astounding in all of these years. So is it different today? Well, it turns out one of the things I'm working on right now here at Socos Labs is this thing called the Inclusion Impact Index. So we're building a system that tracks the progress of entrepreneurs in real time across every major metro in the United States, with an eye towards a couple of particular groups, including women and LGBTQ queer entrepreneurs. And what we see very clearly is, although there are some astonishing success stories and some real change for women, if you want to raise money, start a footwear company. If you're a woman and you want to raise money, start an e-commerce company. You are more likely to get funded in some domains than men are. But it turns out, quite frankly, it's an industry ghettoization. This is simply a bunch of frat brothers from Stanford and Harvard deciding that the only thing you're qualified to do is what they have in mind as what their wives are good at.
But that equally, this ghetto concept equally applies to, by example, if you want to get a rap album funded, you need to be a black man, right?
And so you see these same things. You can see it by race. You can see it again for if you're a gay man and you really want to get funding, start a lifestyle company. So we see this repeated again and again and again. We also see that particularly bad outcomes for high growth female entrepreneurs in highly hierarchical industries. And by bad outcomes, I don't mean they don't produce great companies. They do. What I mean is so much more effort goes into getting funded and finding the talent. So banking is a very hard space for women to go into as an entrepreneur, and interesting enough, so is entertainment. And you might think, but that's so different than banking. Informally, a small number of people make all the decisions. That's kind of what those two industries have in common. And that is a big problem if you are an outgroup.
So given the title of this series is Redefining Leadership, what kind of leadership will change exactly what you've just described, Vivienne?
Well, the one thing that we have the chance to do is, again, my work over the last 5 years has been truly unusual. And I think we'll have a chance to talk about it eventually. But I just get to work on any project that sparks my interest. And by that, I mean, take machine learning and neuroscience and economic modeling and anything else I can think of and go tackle a problem no one has ever solved before. And one of the problems I found really interesting was a question that came to me from a 500,000 person company. What is the biggest untracked predictor of productivity in our organization? Can you model what's going on inside of our company that we're not looking at, that is truly driving, in the terms of maybe some of your viewership, the alpha? And so we were able to do, right now in talking about COVID-19, we're talking about all of this contract tracing. So using mobile phones and Bluetooth to figure out who's met with whom so that you can trace an outbreak backwards in time. I have some really fascinating research there also. But we were actually doing this 15 years ago in education to understand what students were doing when they were talking to each other when an adult wasn't present. But then when I got asked that question, I thought, well, let's track everyone. Forget the org chart. Let's figure out what the real social graph of your company is. And by the way, it is nothing like your org chart. So what was the biggest driver of productivity? I could take hours to go through this in detail, but what was the biggest driver of productivity? It was sacrifice. That may sound really counterintuitive.
Wow.
Isn't productivity, aren't we in a rational, self-interested world? It turns out when people took actions, and we could measure this in finely grained detail with our data sets, when people took actions for which they would not reap a direct benefit, they helped a friend on another team in a project they were in no way associated with. How did we know? Because we actually heard their conversations over lunch. All these people volunteered. This is not ready for HR. This was a crazy mad science experiment. We could track all of these interactions in organizations or within a big company, teams that had more of that, what we call collaborative leadership, more of that, be willing to help someone even if it wouldn't help yourself. That behavior was the single biggest driver of productivity. And we could measure that. This will get really nerdy and wonky. We could actually measure that in the same way that we figure out how deep neural networks work. We could measure the global productivity impact at the company level, at the division level of one single person's actions. Yeah, wow. It's pretty diffuse. We integrate over lots of people, but that was the single biggest thing. Can you think hard? Have you ever promoted someone because
how much sacrifice
they had a tendency to give other people great ideas?
Yeah. That's gold. That really is gold. I knew this would happen, and you knew it as well when we spent 90 minutes preparing for this a week ago, that we're going to have about 25 hours of material here. So I'm going to move through, and we're already 25 minutes into the hour, and we've got lots of questions also from the audience already, which I'll come to in a moment. So we'll come to a couple of areas. I don't want to not deal justice, but let's be really quick with your answers on this couple of questions, and then we can dive into to some other areas. So look, linked to education, you've created innovative work that directly what you're speaking about now in terms of corporates around the deficiencies in the corporate hiring of processes, biases and professional development. How do we achieve the next steps in devising a world where employers source the right people for the right reasons? A quick answer if you can.
I will make it as quick as I can. Recruiting has been studied for 100 years. Average recruiter gives you 5 seconds. They look at your name, your school, and your last job. If that does not fit a pattern, you did not get passed on for further review. Turns out your name, your school, and your last job doesn't predict anything about the quality of work that you do once I know other things about you. So one of the things we need to do is get away from this idea that somehow there are these really easy signals that we could rely on. Again, we got limited time, so I will simply say that we put a lot of time. We actually analyzed 122 million employees at one of my previous companies, an AI for hiring company called Guild. And we found the things that actually predicted the best work was universal across everyone. Same thing for salespeople as for programmers. It was social skills, emotional intelligence, cognitive ability, creativity related skills. These are the things. I know they sound soft, but they are measurable. They are predictive. And this is one of the best parts. They are changeable. So when we get out of recruiting, we also need to look at what is the long-term value add? What is your employee lifetime value? And how can you actually add value to that employee so that you reap even more gain at your company?
Okay, perfect. And I know there's plenty of places to find out more about your work, Dr. Vivienne Ming, on TED Talks and on the web all over the place. For those that are listening to this that were just feeling ripped off with that answer, you could talk for hours on that. It's a very complex, important area. Another quick question, given in this COVID environment we find ourselves, you've done some work on this, and I think it's a very relevant question whilst we're in COVID-19. What are the sources of innovation in lockdown? How do you promote true collaboration without tactility?
Yeah, I mean, our assumption before lockdown is innovation is all about getting as many smart people together in one place as you possibly can and just letting them randomly crash into each other. I mean, that is about the depth of sophistication and the research and innovation. As I often say, no one is innovating on innovation, which is truly disturbing. So we had this chance. We have this global experiment. Nobody gets to hang around with each other. Everything's going through this medium. So we took a bunch of existing research and we then launched into our own AI modeling tool ourselves. And what we find is you can still innovate. What you need are small teams. They need to have very flat hierarchies, and they need to get a little bit of space. And this is something that a lot of companies don't do. They tend to toss everyone into like a massive social network or connect everyone together. Those little teams need breathing room to innovate. Again, there's so much more. We have a new research article we're releasing next week, all about remote work, including specifically innovation. But that is one of the single commonalities, is the fact that you can actually generate innovation behavior by modeling these teams and finding people that really complement each other.
Let's go to some audience questions. Question firstly from Senket Tor is his name, from 3M. What are the dangers of artificial intelligence? Presumably it can be used for intrusive data mining. And I might add in there a question we're going to come up with later, which is the ethical concerns about artificial intelligence.
So, there are so many. It's actually wonderful that in recent years we've been talking about ethics in AI, when before there was nothing like that going on. AI was very much coming out of the hacker ethos of, if you can do it, then you have every right to do it. And it really started with talking about, cars, self-driving cars. Should they kill you or should they kill someone else? And then it got into a much more substantive issues of is there bias in AI? And here's something I think everyone needs to understand. Absolutely. In fact, it is mathematically inescapable. Bias is a fundamental and required part of any cognitive system. Ourselves, rats, artificial intelligence, all of it. But the problem at its heart for me is actually the fact that we have this whole generation of largely young men, though that is improving. Not that young men are bad, but we want as diverse a population as we can. And they're being trained how to build incredibly sophisticated tools, incredibly sophisticated machine learning models, essentially the most sophisticated hammer ever built. But then when they graduate, then they earn that PhD and they go work for Baidu or Google, we aren't asking them to build hammers. We're asking them to build houses. We're asking them to build civilization, which is something they don't know how to do. Not because they're bad people, not because they're amoral, but because if it were easy to solve bias in hiring, we'd have solved it already. AI cannot solve these problems for us. And the biggest tragedies happen when we think that it's magic, when we think that it will do better than a human being can do. What it can take is a solution which already worked and radically transform the economics of that solution, make it available ideally to everyone. But what it cannot do is, and this is something I'm intimately familiar with, I cannot train an AI on the hiring history of Amazon and then think it will do anything other than refuse to hire women, because all AI can do is give you history. It'll give your own moral choices right back at you, squared. And that's a serious problem that I don't think we've tackled well enough yet today.
So you've invented new models around diabetes, which your son suffered from. You've also now invented bipolar episodes, which you can leverage modern technologies to solve many ancient ailments. What does the world need to do from a medical community point of view, from a policy-making point of view, and regulatory point of view to promote further innovations in public health?
You know, I might be a bit of an unusual voice in the AI community, but here's the thing. We can innovate all we want. I have this place, Sokos Labs. We work on crazy problems. They're like episodes of House around here. The only thing that really gets regulated is our innovation and our business plans. So if what you want to do is commercialize anything, yeah, then we run up against regulation, and I think justifiably so. But if you want to build a model that can look at diabetes, that can look at COVID-19, we're working on models right now for kids with traumatic brain injury, understanding Alzheimer's, powerful things that can transform what it means to be human. I don't care whether we ever make any money doing this. We're doing them because we ought to. And with that perspective, we can innovate on anything, and we do. However, I recognize the challenge of being able to commercialize these things to reach as many people as possible. And here, I think that we need to treat artificial intelligence, powerful as it is, with the same respect that we treat pharmacology. We wouldn't just invent a drug and release it into the world without any idea of what effect it had. And we should not build AIs. The system that I built to treat my son's diabetes decides how much insulin he gets, which means in about 3 hours, it could kill him if I was not careful. Now, that's never happened because, of course, I'm a genius and it's perfect. But we need some place, some sandbox where we can experiment before we take it out into the rest of the world.
So when you spoke for Conexus Financial a few years ago at one of our global conferences at Stanford University, you also said that you have the capacity now to make people more intelligent, and that the example that you used, I believe at the time, was a very wealthy person could in fact make their kid the smartest kid in the world, and that, in your view, would be an unethical way in which to use that technology. At the same time, if someone were in an accident, a car crash or whatever, where they were brain damaged, you could potentially restore their intelligence. Can you, I hope I'm quoting you relatively accurately here, can you expand a little more on those two kind of extreme examples and where the ethical dilemma, how that ethical dilemma is going to fall and get sorted out?
So let's start with the technology. I actually have a couple of companies that I'm on the boards of and support as chief science advisors. And one of them is specifically looking at, and let's get really nerdy here, at alternating current transcranial stimulation of the midline theta. And yes, there will be a quiz later. So this particular technology, you know, the old Simon game where you follow lights and sounds in a pattern. And if you're got a pretty good memory, you can get out to about 6, 7, 8 length sequences. They built this little thing. It's a patch. You put it here. It electrically stimulates your brain and at about 8 hertz. And now suddenly, instead of 8 length sequences, you can do 10 length sequences. So it increases your working memory by about 20%. By the way, working memory increases of about 20% for the average person translates into about $30,000 a year of increased earnings. It translates into years of additional life. People with larger working memory spans live longer. So this is a very tangible change in a person's life. And so this is where we're coming into, you know, imagine you sell this at a very privileged price, and every wealthy kid going in for their university exams has got one of these patches on. They last about 2 hours, and everyone else doesn't. Well, that's a pretty serious advantage to have. So what do you do in a world where someone like me wants to use this for kids with traumatic brain injury, which is one of the most common symptoms is working memory deficits, or soldiers that have experienced brain trauma, or while at the other end, people just might use this as indulgence for a slight advantage in trying to get a job. And somehow we need to deal with the fact that the answer to this question, just like as with AI, it isn't yes or no. It isn't that this is a terrible technology that it will destroy the world, or that, you know what, if we're going to allow it, we're just going to allow it for everyone without anyone thinking about it. How do we make certain that this actually gives us a better world rather than simply spreads us further apart from one another? And, you know, we have the same thing. I have another company that uses a similar kind of synchronization technology, except it just uses light. And it treats Alzheimer's and dementia. And I think this is amazing. The idea that maybe you could just sit in a room for an hour reading a book, and almost imperceptibly, the flickering of the light would actually reduce your plaque loads and your symptomology. And there's been wonderful work on this at MIT and our team as well. I'm so excited with what's possible. I want to deliver this to people that truly need it. Someday, this will very likely change the definition of what it means to be human. But I think we need to understand that that definition needs to be something we all agreed to. It isn't just because I'm very smart and I have the right funding, I get to decide it for everyone else.
So it leads nicely to a question from our audience, Indy from Freedom Park Financial. Firstly, Vivienne, thank you for the wonderful work that you have been doing. Have you got any cure for autism?
So it turns out, in addition to diabetes, my son has autism. It's mild, but oh my goodness, if you take him to the dentist, it removes all doubt. And it's really challenging. And you know, one of the most common symptoms of autism is an inability to read facial expressions. Well, by sheer coincidence, my very first project in machine learning was doing real-time facial analysis for lie detection for the CIA. When I gave this talk in Brazil, they weren't so thrilled about the idea that I'd done a project for the CIA. But, you know, to me, as a first-time academic, getting to build this thing that could learn that a smile was someone was happy, it was addictive. Like, that was it. I wasn't going to stick wires into brains. I was going to build artificial intelligence. And then, you know, years later, I had this project where someone said, you know, the UN has this book with 1 million photographs of orphan refugees. Is there anything you could do to help reunite them with their families? And I thought, I know how to build face recognition. What if I could build a little game that would allow an uncle to find his niece lost as an orphan in a refugee center. You're from Damascus and you haven't heard from your sister's family in Aleppo, and you go to Jordan and they give you a book with 1 million photographs. We made a little game on an iPad, and in 5 minutes you found her. If she's anywhere in the world. And then I got to build, I could show them to you right now. I got to build for Google Glass a system that could read your facial expressions and write the expressions on the screen. Or if the kid didn't have strong literacy skills, and that is a challenge with autism sometimes, you could even just show an animated picture of a smile or a frown. And we thought, gosh, even if my kid could never learn to read facial expressions, at least they'd know. It would be a prosthetic. But it turns out, not only can they learn using this technology, they can learn better than they can with, let's take, for example, flashcards, which are still state of the art. But here was the part that we never even predicted. Not only do these kids learn how to read facial expressions, they learn empathy. They learn a theory of mind. I guess the way I interpret it is, if you learn that a smile is a smile just because someone tells you, you never learn why people smile. But when you learn in natural social interactions with other people, suddenly it has meaning. It has a theory of mind. So a true treatment for autism, I have some ideas. One of the common symptomologies of autism from a neurological perspective is a lack of connectivity between different parts of the cortex. And this requires invasive, getting inside the skull and the meninges and into the brain. But I think it is, at least in theory, possible to help reconnect those regions of the brain. In fact, there's some nanotechnologies I'm interested in doing some mad science with along those lines. Here at UC Berkeley, we have something called neural desks and neural moats, nanotechnologies that can actually interact with neurons. But I just want to be clear, that is going to be a long way off. Whereas these wearable prosthetics are something that might actually help today.
So on that point, helping today, let's talk about COVID-19 for a moment. You mentioned light technology for treatment. Sarah has asked this question. Have you looked into UV light treatment for COVID-19?
So I have not looked into UV light treatment, although some people have. So the reason this comes up is, of course, many organisms just don't do well with UV light. They get irradiated, and it's a good way to sterilize things. In theory, could you apply UV radiation essentially like dialysis? Gosh, that would be a risky procedure to do on most people because they are not so seriously threatened by COVID-19. But I can see where the theory comes from. I am going to talk, however, about something completely unrelated. What if you could use social network not to figure out who is a super spreader, but who might become a super spreader? So that was one of the projects we have worked on for COVID-19. Could we predict ahead of time? There has actually been repeated findings in Hong Kong, in India, and in Canada. 70% of infected individuals go on to infect 0 other people, no one else. There are not is 0. In fact, somewhere between 10 and 20% of infected individuals account for virtually all new infections. What if you could figure out who they were ahead of time and just pay them to stay home, pay them to not go to a nightclub, pay them to stay out of a certain subway system? A lot of carrot, not so much stick. And when we did that, we actually were able to combine that with another bit of research that found, and this again in Sweden, in Canada, in the United States, the overwhelming source of mortality from COVID-19 is elder care and specialty medical care. So there was a social analysis done here in the United States. Unfortunately, and I'm willing to bet it's very much the same, and I'll show you, but I could be wrong. We don't pay our elder care workers nearly enough. This is definitely a low-end wage job, elder care. So of course, they have to work a second job. Well, if you're an elder care worker and you need a second job, guess what job it's going to be? Elder care in another facility. So a social network analysis was done of elder care facilities and found that they were directly connected to 17 other facilities on average. The number one source of mortality from COVID-19 is massively socially connected with high-risk, low-wage workers. That is disastrous. So we built a model to actually try and predict who would be the cause of the most deaths so that we can identify them and differentiate. I mean, imagine, and I don't say this frivolously, but imagine being able to go to work because we have analyzed your social network, and we know simply that you are unlikely to be a meaningful spreader of COVID-19. And instead, we could really focus differential intervention on those most likely to spread and those most likely to suffer negative consequences. Because right now, here's the other analysis we did. For every life we have saved, 16 people might well die over the next 30 years. This research pulls in, for example, from the, and let me be clear, COVID-19 is a terrible disease. It is a threat to humanity. And yet our response to it has been all or nothing. Either there's no problem whatsoever, or we all need to go hide in a bunker. And it turns out neither of those are rational. The whole world boarded a trolley, the classic philosopher's trolley problem. We've got 2 million dead over here, and we've got so many more on this other track over the next 30 years. And a lot of this was built on past research on the mortality and economic effects of past recessions. So it just simply the economic consequences of COVID may well kill more people than COVID itself. And somehow we need to make rational policies, even though these are hard things.
So we have many, many questions here, which I'm going to try to get to throughout if I can. And there's also quite a bit of topic here related to your specialty of AI that we haven't yet covered. But to be honest, I want to now get personal again for a moment,
Sure.
because it's particularly important that I think our audience gets a whole picture of what makes your story so fascinating. So can I ask you parts of your personal story now?
Please, let's go on with it.
So this series is about redefining leadership. It's impossible to avoid politics and inclusion. We are living through a period of heightened anxiety, animosity, and division. In the past few weeks, we've seen Amy Coney Barrett nominated to the Supreme Court in the United States, meaning that there will soon be only 3 of 9 liberal justices on the Supreme Court in your country, hindering the openness of the US towards progressive thinking. As a transgender woman, how do you feel about this?
It's terrifying and it's heartbreaking. I think of what I've been able to do, and I hope I don't say this out of wild arrogance, but that model that I built to treat my son's diabetes, I just gave it away. The system we built to predict manic depression, I gave it away. The companies I built have hired thousands and thousands of people. I like to think that I've had a positive impact on this world. And the interesting thing is all of that, all of my science papers, everything that I feel of true good I have done in my life, I have done as me. I've done as Vivienne. And I went through transition back when I was an academic. I actually met my wife in graduate school, and I am not the person she agreed to marry, though I did give her a little heads up before the wedding. And, it's one thing to say, being me has allowed me to be happy. And I would wish that for anyone. But I'm saying that being me has allowed me to be meaningful. Being me has allowed me to have a positive impact on other people's lives. I don't mean that nothing good could have come out of my life before this, but to be truly honest, I actually, as I said, I transitioned as an academic. I lost my position at Stanford. And the head of that institute, it was not Stanford itself, but the head of the institute said, you've lost your edge. And I look back on that statement and I think, I founded 6 companies since then. I've been the chief scientist at 2 others. I've invented so many things. I don't know what Edgy's talking about. You mean I'm not angry and mean all the time anymore? I thought you'd appreciate that.
Well, suicidal has happened.
Well, yeah, I think the one thing that really resonates with me, you asked me this ahead of time, when do I find time to sleep? And I told you this funny story that for the first half of my adult life, I had terrible insomnia. I would regularly watch the sun come up. I mean, desperate to fall asleep, but unable to. And you don't want to hear the stories about how I managed to find sleep because they're terrible. And then one day, for no reason whatsoever, but by the way, it was 2005, which makes it probably 10 years to the day from the night I didn't kill myself. And it's my birthday, October 19th. Feel free to send gifts. And I turned to my then fiance in bed, and for absolutely no reason whatsoever, I said to her, "You want to know my deep, dark secret?" I said, "I wish I was a woman." Well, good night. And I turned over to go back to bed because I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to share with her, which, by the way, is one kind of a lesson, which is be careful what you say to your loved ones in the wee hours of the night because shit happens. It gets real. And you find yourself living a life you didn't think was even possible. But here was the thing. The next night, my head hit the pillow and I fell asleep. And I've not had a single night of insomnia ever since. She once said to Oprah, no less, it was like magic. It was the closest thing to magic she's ever seen. And she was asked, you agreed to marry a man. Why did the two of you stay together? And she said, the most romantic thing I've ever heard has actually been said about me. She said, the person I loved was in pain and I knew it. And now she's happy and I love her even more. Do we really care more about who I love than the positive impact I have in the world? And I promise you, I am not the only one. That this world is full of people that can make a positive change in the lives around them, but they never get the chance. And I get the fear. I don't accept it, but I get the fear that many people have right now. You feel like Australia is your country. The United States is your country. It's always been this way. I don't know. I grew up in coastal California. I grew up in a world where it was just a bunch of hippies. My kids are the largest racial group at their school here in Berkeley, which is mixed. And I think it's wonderful. I don't care whether it's for everyone. In fact, that's the whole point. I don't care what other people need to be for themselves. What I care is that we leave enough space for one another, because the biggest, most positive impact we will ever have on the world, the surest way we will ever find an amazing life is if we give it to someone else.
So I think, that's one of the most fascinating parts of your story is that you're happily married to Norma, your wife, and your co-parent, Felix, who's 12, and Athena, who is 9, and you're still happily married, even though when you first married and fathered those children, you're a man, and today you're a woman. But you also said something very fascinating to me during the numerous conversations we've had now over the years, that you don't really believe in structured leadership. You believe in role modeling. So I guess, can you explain that and tell me also how you parent and role model Felix and Athena?
Listen, I get to study enough people that I understand the value of having someone that can get the book straight and come up with the tactics to execute, the importance of having a coach that can help everyone be their best selves. But when I look at the highest impact of leadership, it's not what you say, it's not what's written on the walls, it's what you actually do. It is role modeling that defines, and negatively so. In fact, a paper just came out saying very clearly that companies led by narcissists, and yes, there's a test for that, there is significantly greater malfeasance. There is decreases in productivity long term. There are all these negative consequences because, of course, people recognize what you represent is what's actually meaningful. When I got offered the chief scientist role at Uber, back when Travis Kalanick was still in charge, the original founder, hell no, you could not pay me $10 million to be alone in a room with that man. And it turns out that is pretty much, once they IPO'd, what it cost me. But it wouldn't have been worth it. I want to be around people that I am willing to make a sacrifice for, because I know they're willing to make a sacrifice for me, not they are willing to throw me aside as soon as it suits their personal needs. So, when I think about parenting, I know from my own research and many others, the biggest impact we will ever have. In fact, I get asked this a lot, and it seems ridiculous to me to get asked such a question, but Dr. Ming, how can I be a better parent? I founded a couple of educational technology companies. My wife actually runs research for the San Francisco school system. People seem to think I know something about how to be a parent. And I offer them the most honest answer that I can. Be a better person. Be the person you want your child to be, because it is unambiguous. That is the biggest influence you will ever have on them. The things you tell them to do, the things you insist on, is nothing compared to what you role model. We see it again and again, from the wealthiest, most elite of families all the way down to the most destitute. It is who you are that has the biggest influence on your kids. And if that's not there, it's not the end of the world. There's peer role modeling. Neighborhood effects are powerful as well. But that's the main thing. And when I recognize what I'm good at as a founder of a company, I'm good at why. I am good at figuring out creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems and then diving headlong into them. And what I've also learned is everything works better when I hire grown-ups to handle all the rest of it. I know what I'm good at, and I'm good at role modeling solving a problem. I can pretend to be a grown-up, and I can offer management when it needs to be there. I'm clever enough, but I put my efforts in where my strengths are truly going to pay off.
We sadly only have 2 minutes left, and so many questions. But what's your advice for the investors on this call, and particularly the global pension funds, how they can make a positive contribution into some of the areas that we've been talking about?
My goodness, there are so many things that you can look at, but I think one of them is support venture funds. If you're putting your money into high-risk capital, support venture funds that have a track record of seeing the true value of the people that they invest in. And they don't simply invest in you because you went to Oxbridge or Stanford, that they've actually been able to truly discover alpha, finding those missing amazing people and giving them the shot. Because quite frankly, the people that most venture funds invest in, they would have been successful anyways. You're not truly changing anything. And so that's one way of looking at it. And here's another one: representation. I know everyone, at least in the circles I run in, they care that the world feels inclusive and has a space for everyone. If you really want to make an impact, you can't hire that out of the mailroom. You need to bring people in at leadership levels that truly represent the breadth of the community that you're trying to make an impact in. And we see this, it's amazing, but the single biggest predictor of the size of wage gap is the number of female faces on the leadership team of an organization. Soon as a woman comes in as a CEO, even with no change in policy around inclusion, wage gap drops because the young women working in that company work harder, because now their brains are telling them your hard work is going to pay off. We have the evidence. So take that seriously. That isn't just being philanthropic. That is not you being generous. Those investments will truly pay off. Sometimes the positive payoffs are a bit of an externality, but you'll be a part of bringing that into the world. That's something too.
Well, congratulations on the life you've had so far, Dr. Vivienne Ming. And I'm so pleased for you that you've come full circle from not belonging, coming from Kansas, to being homeless, suicidal, to now having multiple companies, multiple degrees, and being able to inspire people the way you do. And not only, but change the world the way you do, not just through artificial intelligence and through your campaigning, but many other ways as well. So if you'd like more of Dr. Vivienne Ming, please look her up on what I understand is the World Wide Web. I'm sure you'll find her, and I'm sure you'll find TED Talks and many other ways. And of course, you can watch this on playback at any time through your preferred Conexus Financial platform, investment magazine, online with Professional Planner, or globally top1000funds.com. I have one final closing question for you, Vivienne, and that is the stress of this year, the California fires, which are still raging around you, the US election, and for many people, the very toxic, distressing episode of a Trump presidency and things that have come with that, social distancing and coronavirus. How have you been taking care of yourself? And is there any nuggets of gold you can provide to our audience as we close out?
At Socos Labs, we take problems no one else can solve. And if I think my team can make a meaningful difference, I pay for everything. And if we come up with a solution, we give it all away for free. I think I already said the way I take care of myself. I work incredibly hard and I give it all away. I guess my one thing that I can share with you, and again, research driven, you want a long life, you want literally a wealthy life, one with many friends, you want the top walking speed at age 65, go plant a tree. Do something, make a sacrifice, make the world around you better. That is how you move forward from a year like this, is recognize that it doesn't do any good to ask, will it ever get better? The only thing that will do any good is for you to actively go out and make that better world. And I guess I will offer this one additional statement, maybe if anyone's a little younger and they're listening, but it's for the older crowd as well. You don't get the world that you fought for. You get how you fought for it. There are no shortcuts. You can't compromise your principles to get the thing that you really want. You only ever get the compromise. Be that person that will make a better world. I know it sounds like a line, but the wonderful thing is I have about 1 billion data points to back it up.
Well, I think you've articulated in many, many ways how to redefine leadership for us today. Even though when we did do this original setup, you said, no, I'm not really a leader. I don't believe in leadership, blah, blah, blah. I mean, even those comments you just made at the close there. It's worth, I'd like to thank all of you who signed in today to listen. Please share this around. I'd also like to thank all those who asked questions, and sorry for the very many that we haven't gotten your answers yet. I'd like to thank our partner and sponsor, MLC Wealth. And as it happens, our next Redefining Leadership program will be on the 25th of November. And it's an interesting person, an unlikely leader, Vivienne. His name is Shane Fitzsimmons. He's the current Commissioner of Resilience, New South Wales, and was the former Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, and became a placement on our evening news for 7 months over this last summer as he fought through and led the charge of thousands and thousands of volunteer firefighters through the worst fires in Australian history. So he was the leader of that effort, and we are spending an hour with him on the 25th of November to look at redefining leadership and what leadership is to him. Dr. Vivienne Ming, thanks once again for your time, your generosity. I can't wait to seeing you in person again. Take care of yourself in Silicon Valley, California, and we'll have you here in Australia when it's safe to do so. Thanks again, and goodbye.